Today, Mosiah 29 through Alma 4. And the big question that we're dealing with today is, how do you create a society of peace? And what role do people and governments play in creating a peaceful society?
So, consider the question, what would it be like to live in a society where you could guarantee that your government leaders were wise people? They made perfect decisions that would benefit the most number of people for the longest period of time without taking any of the glory or the credit or the power just for themselves or to gratify their own pride. What if you could also guarantee that those leaders, before making any decision, would always go to the Lord and plead for His guidance, His light, His direction in making those decisions? That would be an amazing scenario. Here's King Mosiah. You ready? You have, and he is named after his grandfather, obviously, King Mosiah the First, that we have record of, and then his father, King Benjamin. So here's King Mosiah. He's come to the end of his life. He realizes he's not going to live very much longer. And so he's also a great student of history. This is the king who translated the Jaredite record, which is loaded with stories of kings, one after the other, most of them being really, really wicked in that case, and the occasional really good king mixed in. But he saw that. He has the brass plates. He knows the history of the house of Israel really well in this regard, that when Moses brought the children of Israel into the promised land, after Moses and Joshua, we turned the ruling of the people over to judges until that day when the people come and say, we want to be like all the other nations. They all have kings. We want to be like them. We want to be like the world. And so Samuel the prophet went to the Lord and said, what do you want me to do? They want a king. And God said, no, Samuel, give them what they want. Give them a king. They've not rejected you as my prophet. They've rejected me as their ultimate king. So this is the unique perspective that these three and Nephi at the very beginning of the book seem to bring into the story that most kings, like the vast majority, the highest percentage of kings, don't bring in, which is God is the King of Kings, the King of Heaven.
And Jacob, the brother of Nephi, teaches us very powerfully in 2 Nephi chapter 10. And he's actually quoting God. For he that raiseth up a king against me shall perish. Think of King Noah. For I, the Lord, the King of heaven, will be their king. And I will be a light unto them forever that hear my words. So as you read the Bible and as you read the Book of Mormon, this is actually one of the driving questions that creates the history of these people, is them trying to figure out who's the king. And Nephi, through his brother Jacob, reveals it. It's God. God is the king. And all these stories that show up all over the Book of Mormon are people having conflict about, well, I want to be a human king. And what we learn from Mosiah is that God will allow that, a human king, under very specific circumstances. But what we also see is that God actually prefers that we empower people through agency to choose him as the king.
That's wonderful perspective. That what normally kings do in the history of the world, in the history of the house of Israel, in the history of the book of Ether, all of the perspective that Mosiah has at his disposal, he's looking at this saying, wow, this normally doesn't go well. We've been very blessed in his family line in the recent history to say this is good. But he said it normally doesn't go well. Why? Because most kings take power and agency and liberty away from the people and take it to themselves. Whereas those who are successful in their kingship turn to God and recognize his authority as the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and they act like Jesus would, servant leadership.